Hello everyone, welcome to Michigan Man MTG, and I'm back for my top 20 rares for Standard. Before we get into the list, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Avatar: The Last Airbender, preview season, and beyond. So let's dive into the list. So coming in at number 20, I've got Fire Lord Zuko for Mardu colors, legendary creature, human noble ally, a 2/4 with fire bending of X, where X is Fire Lord Zuko's power. And whenever you cast a spell from exile, and whenever a permanent you control enters from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So very powerful if you're consistently getting things in from exile, and then you're getting all that extra firebending mana, so you may be able to play things during your combat step, whether it's a combat trick or something else. I think Zuko is a card that's going to enable some of that stuff in Standard. Next, I've got at number 19, Toph Hard-Headed Teacher. For 2, a red and a green mana, legendary creature that's a human warrior ally. And a 3/4, when Toph enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And whenever you cast a spell, Earthbend 1, if that spell is a lesson, put a +1/+1 counter on that land. So really nice earthbending ability here on Toph, that every time you're casting a spell, you're going to be able to earthbend. So that's why I've got this at number 19. At number 18, I have Katara the Fearless for Bant colors, legendary creature, human warrior ally, and a 3/3. And if a triggered ability of an ally you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. And getting that additional trigger is why I've got it at number 18. At number 17, I've got Momo, Friendly Flyer for a white mana. You can legendary creature that's a lemur bat ally and is a 1/1 with flying. And the first non-lemur creature spell with flying you cast each of your turns costs 1 less to cast, so nice mana reduction cost there on Momo. And whenever another creature you control with flying enters, Momo gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So I think Momo will be in a Flyers deck where you're consistently casting spells that are 2, 3, maybe even 4 mana and getting that cost reduction with them. And because of that, I've got Momo at 17. All right, number 16, I've got Wartime Protesters for 3 and a red mana. You get a human rebel ally. That's a 4/4 with haste. And whenever another ally you control enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, and it gains haste until end of turn. This is one of the cards that I think is going to enable the ally deck in Standard, because every time you cast an ally after you have Wartime Protester in play, it's going to get a +1/+1 counter, and it's also going to get haste. And because of that, I've got it at 16. I would have it higher if it costs less mana. All right, and number 15, I've got the Earth King for 3 and a green mana. You get a legendary creature, human noble ally, and a 2/2. And when the Earth King enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 green bear creature token, and when one or more creatures you control with power 4 or greater attacks, search your library for up to that many basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So I'm wondering, the Earth King here can certainly fit into our ally deck. You're getting for 4 mana, you're getting 8 power and toughness on the battlefield, and that ability then to get additional basic lands every time you are able to attack with a creature with 4 power or greater, I think is a really powerful ability in Standard and can really ramp you in games. At number 14, I've got Diligent Zookeeper for 3 and a green mana. You get a human citizen ally. That's a 4/4. And each non-human creature you control gets +1/+1 for each of its creature types to a maximum of 10. So this is a card that I think is probably going to be better in older formats, but certainly in Standard, the ability to give a creature probably +2 most of the time, because they're going to have 2 creature types, is a really powerful ability in Standard. And I think because of that, we're going to see it played in a kind of green stompy deck. All right, number 13, I've got Earthbender Ascension for 2 and a green mana. You get an enchantment. When this enchantment enters the battlefield, Earthbend 2. Then search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So for 3 mana, you're getting a 2/2 creature and a basic land. So I think on rate, it's a good card from there. And then it also has a landfall trigger, and whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, put a quest counter on this enchantment. When you do, if it has 4 or more quest counters on it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains trample until end of turn. And the ability to give something trample and a +1/+1 counter, I think, is really powerful, because most likely you're going to hit your land drop. You're obviously, in the turn that Earthbending Ascension comes into play, you're going to hit a land drop then, because it's going to give you a land drop. And then, over the next couple of turns, you can hopefully get a couple more land drops in, and quickly you get to that 4 land drops and activate that +1/+1 counter ability and the ability to give something trample. And that's why I've got this at number 13. At number 12, I've got Great Divide Guide for 1 and a green mana. You get a Human Scout ally. That's a 2/3. And each land and ally you control has tap for 1 mana of any color. So really powerful ability on the Great Divide Guide here, where you're basically turning all your creatures into sources of mana, and it's solving any mana problems, because based on what we're seeing in the Avatar set, you could have an ally deck in 5 colors potentially, and Great Divide Guide is kind of the answer to your mana problems with that kind of deck, because all of your creatures can tap for any color of mana, and so can your lands. All right, at number 11, I've got Fire Nation Palace. It's a land, and this land enters tapped unless you control a basic land, and it adds red mana. And for 1 and a red mana, target creature you control gains Firebending until the end of the turn. And that Firebending is 4, so whenever it attacks, add 4 red mana to your mana pool. This mana lasts until end of combat. So I think this is going to be a really powerful way to really enable the firebending ability in Standard. And we've got a number of cards that either are instants or flash cards that you can have them come into play during combat. And because of that, I think getting that additional mana here is going to be really critical to the success of a firebending deck. At number 10, I've got Earthen Ally for a green mana. You get a 0/2 Human Soldier ally, and this creature gets +1/+0 for each color among allies you control. So if you can get all 5 colors in allies onto the battlefield, he's a 5/2, but more likely it's probably going to be a 3/2 for 1 mana a lot of the time. And I think because of that, that makes perfect sense to play this in that ally deck, because you're likely to have at least 2 separate colors, probably 3 in that deck. And on top of that, for 2 and a mana of each color, you can Earthbend 5, and target land you control becomes a 0/0 creature with haste. That's still a land and has 5 +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies or is exiled, return it to the battlefield tapped. We're probably not going to see this ability used all that often, but because of the Great Divide Scout guide there, we're going to be able to potentially get all of our lands to provide us with colors of any mana. So potentially we could even meet this requirement of Earthbending 5. All right, at number 9, I've got Firebending Ascension for 1 and a red mana. You get an enchantment, and when this enchantment enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 red soldier creature token with Firebending of 1. And whenever a creature you control attacks, causes a triggered ability of that creature to trigger, put a quest counter on this enchantment. Then if it has 4 or more quest counters on it, you may copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So anytime we've got any kind of a triggered ability that happens during combat, i.e. firebending or any other bending that we might do, then this is going to get that quest counter. And I don't think it's going to be hard to get to 4, probably within a turn or 2, simply because almost every card you're probably going to have in this deck is going to have a triggered ability on it. At number 8, I've got Suki, Courageous Rescuer for 1 and 2 white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human warrior ally, and a 2/4. Other creatures you control get +1/+0, so a way to buff your entire team. And whenever another permanent you control leaves the battlefield during your turn, create a 1/1 white ally creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. But if you had, you know, like I said in the last card, if anytime you have a trigger ability, it doubles those triggered abilities if you've got the 4 counters on it. So Suki could work in that kind of deck, but more likely where we're going to see Suki is in that ally deck, where anytime one of your allies dies, you're going to just replace it with a 1/1 creature token. At number 7, I've got Earth King's Lieutenant for a green and a white mana, human soldier ally. That's a 1/1 with trample. And when this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other ally creature you control. And when another ally you control enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So Earth King's Lieutenant is is really what was during the Innistrad block Thalyi's Lieutenant. So this is an incredibly powerful card that buffs your entire team when it comes into play. So you're not playing it probably on turn 2. You're playing in the mid to late game and giving a +1/+1 counter to all your creatures. And then as you play additional allies throughout the course of the game, you're going to go ahead and add counters to Earth King's Lieutenant. And the nice thing about Earth King's Lieutenant is you can have multiple copies on the battlefield, so you can do this multiple times over the course of a game. So that's why I've got this at number 7, and might be one of the sleeper cards potentially for the best card in the set. At number 6, I've got South Pole Voyager for 1 and a white mana. You get a human scout ally. That's a 2/2. And whenever this creature or another ally you control enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. And if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you get to draw a card. So that drawing a card ability on South Pole Voyager, I think, is going to be a really important one in the ally deck. Really is going to help keep the decks, your hand stocked with cards to play, and continue to go ahead and play out your game plan. At number 5, I've got Zhao, the Moonslayer, for 1 and a red mana. You elect a creature that's a human soldier and is a 2/2 with menace, and non-basic lands enter tap, which I think is going to be a powerful ability for red against the multicolored control decks that we're going to see a lot of in standard. We've just had the ban announcement, and what I'm mostly seeing is control stuff currently in the decks that I'm playing against, at least on Arena. So having the ability to turn all those non-basic lands off for a turn, I think, is going to be really powerful. And then for 7 mana, you can put a Conqueror counter on Zhao, and as long as Zhao has a Conqueror counter on him, non-basic lands are mountains. So incredibly powerful ability there. Now, the thing where this is really important is just making all those non-basics come in tapped, because it's going to slow down your opponent's game plan pretty significantly, and they're going to have to really think about how they're going to want to play their mana out if they can't remove Zhao. And then you're probably going to be playing this as part of a firebending deck. So I don't think getting to that 7 mana is going to be too difficult in standard, or more precisely in Pioneer and in Modern as well. And because of that, I think what we're going to see is Zhao is going to be potentially a multi-format all-star card from the set. At number 4, I've got Day of Black Sun for X and 2 black mana. You get a sorcery. Each creature with mana value X or less loses all abilities until end of turn, and you get to destroy all creatures. So Black now has a very, very effective board wipe where, for 4 mana, you can knock out every creature with 2 power or 2 mana value or less. And I think that's going to be really powerful in standard, because I think what we're likely to see is decks that are trying to utilize, creatures that are 1, 2, or 3 mana to try to win the game quickly, or even in the black decks that we're seeing currently in standard, they're playing a lot of 1 and 2 and 3 drop creatures. So I think what we're likely to see is the Day of the Black Sun become kind of the perfect board wipe for black decks where they can kind of wipe out what your opponent is playing, and then you're probably playing creatures that are going to be of higher mana value, so your creatures will survive Day of Black Sun and your opponents won't. At number 3, I've got Firebending Student for 1 and a red mana. You get a human monk. That's a 1/2 with prowess. And Firebending of X, where X is this creature's power. So Firebending Student is an incredibly powerful card because every time you cast a spell that's a non-creature spell, it's going to buff it to give it a +1/+1 for that turn. And my suspicion is this is going to probably go in an is it shell. So you're going to do things probably to try to increase the power of Firebending Student over the course of your pre-combat step. And then during your combat step, you're going to be able to play some large instants that or enchantments that have flash. And because of that, Firebending Student, I think, is going to be really a multi-format potential all-star because of that ability to generate that 3, 4, 5 extra mana every single turn you're attacking with her. All right, at number 2, I've got May, Scornful Striker for 1 and a black mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human noble ally and a 2/2 with first strike. And whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, they lose 2 life. So this is the ultimate card against combo decks, control decks. So as long as you can keep May on the field, every time your opponent casts a spell, it's going to cost them 2 life. And what we've seen over the last several months with the mono red deck is it's trying to capitalize on triggered damage abilities, and May is just another good source of that, where you're gonna have your opponent plays a non-creature spell, they lose 2 life, just like we see with any number of cards in the mono red deck that are doing the same kind of thing. And because of that, I think this is going to be a key part of a new, maybe potential style of deck that could even be a red and white Rakdos style deck that is going to just do a ton of incidental damage to your opponent. All right, coming in at number 1, I've got Aang, Swift Surveyor for 1, a white and a blue mana. Legendary creature that's a human avatar ally and is a 2/3 with flash and flying. And when Aang enters the battlefield, airbend up to 1 other target creature or spell. Exile it. While it's exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 rather than its mana cost. So this is Spell Queller on a body, where you can either spell quell or in essence put in timeout temporarily a spell, or you can remove a creature that your opponent has that maybe is attacking you, flash this in, and then you take it out of combat, and that changes the combat math for your opponent. So I'm really excited to be able to build and play with Aang. And then if you can waterbend 8, you can transform Aang, and then you get Aang and La, Ocean's Fury, legendary creature that's an avatar spirit ally, and a 5/5 with reach and trample. And whenever Aang or La attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each tap creature you control. So every time you're attacking with Aang, you're going to buff your entire team. And I think that's a really, really powerful ability if you get it over on the backside. So that's my list of the top 20 rares from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Tell me what you thought in the comments. Did I miss something? Are there cards that you're excited to play as well? And I will be back with a uncommon video tomorrow, and I've left a link here for my video that I did yesterday that had my ranking of the mythic rares from the set. So thanks, and I will see you in the next one.